afternoon.
Sorry, you can wait a little bit more. It's preparing. I'll tell you when. Okay, now you can.
Yes. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are, either here in Stockholm or remotely from your homes or from your offices. Welcome to this global launch of the WASHREG portal to regulators, a 30 minutes online session, although we have quite of a full room in Stockholm in the World Water Week. I would like to briefly introduce the speakers of today's session. I have Alejandro Jimenez, who is the director of the Water and Sanitation Department at SIWI. I also have Ahmed Garwani, WASH specialist at UNICEF Iraq country office. I also have Batsi Majuru, who is a technical officer and a focal point for drinking water regulation and testing at the World Health Organization. And last but not least, I have Maria Eduarda Gobera, who is Water and Sanitation Senior Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. Since this is just a 30-minute session, I will pass the floor directly to Alejandro Jimenez, who is going to introduce you the WASHREG portal, which we are launching today. So Alejandro, without further delay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and thanks everyone for being here. As Jorge mentioned, our intention now is to explain a little bit what is the WASHREG process and what is the portal you can access to, where you will find a number of materials and tools which we hope would be very useful for all of you. Next slide. So the WASHREG approach stands for WASH regulation, as you might have guessed already, and it's a set of methodology that helps analyzing in a structured way regulation in a particular country or area and trying to come up with a set of practical actions that are going to be then later implemented for improvement. Next slide. So as we typically say, good governance begins with leadership, effective coordination, and regulation. And that was the aim of us, together with UNICEF, WHO, and the Inter-American Development Bank, embarking on developing this suite of tools a few years ago already, and which we are very happy to have tested and implemented in a number of countries, as we will see, and that has, we think, is now time to have this portal for everyone to hear from the lessons and the examples that we have collected. Next slide. As I was mentioning, the ambition of the WASHREG is to have a multi-stakeholder diagnostic and set up number of practical actions to then implement improvements into the regulation of a certain country. And it can be implemented by different stakeholders at different scales. So depending on the country context and the priorities. Next slide. So the WASHREG can be implemented in any potential scenario. So we don't need to have a very strong independent regulator to be able to implement this approach. On the contrary, this can be implemented in countries where the regulator is just starting off or being created, or where we already have a clear regulatory structure, but we want to, there is a willingness to improve it, or where there is not sufficient clarity on the regulatory mandates and how they can be distributed across different institutions. Next slide. So the WASHREG encompasses 6 areas, from price regulation, service quality regulation, competition regulation, consumer protection, environmental and public health regulation, and through the 3 steps of the regulatory cycle, from the rule definition and approval granting, monitor, inform, and enforcement. Next slide. So it also covers regulatory and autonomy, and we refer to this as the level of immunity or let's say independence in some sense that the institutions that carry the regulatory functions have, because that also determines what is the set of actions that can be put in place. And we talk about different dimensions of autonomy as we see in that slide. Next. So the WASHREG is articulated through a step-by-step process where there is a matter of course, need and demand identification and analysis of the country context, and then through a structured process of a workshop, which is one of the main milestones, there is an analysis of what are the weaknesses and potential opportunities to improve, which results in an action plan that needs to be validated. And then we come to the most important part, which is the implementation of the agreed action plan. Next slide. So this approach has been already implemented in a number of countries: Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Iraq, into different parts of the country, as my colleague Ahmed would perhaps tell us soon, and Liberia. Next. And you will see that in our website, washreg.org, you can access a number of materials. So the first one is the overview of regulation in water and sanitation services and what the principles around that. Then we come to the methodology of this approach with how the different steps need to be undertaken and the supporting materials. And then we come to the action sheets. Next slide. The action sheets have collected a number of examples from different countries, type of activities that can be taken, plus examples from different geographies, so that the regulators and the stakeholders that are conducting this process can have inspiration for what others have done, what has worked, and also trying to provide links and materials that can be of further interest for those willing to implement this approach. So as you see there, we have 57 action sheets that integrate several examples in each of them, up to almost 200 by now. And of course, we welcome you and your input in case you would have relevant examples of improved regulatory practice that you think can be shared through this portal. Next slide. So here is a little bit what you will see in the website, and you can download the documents I mentioned before, but also, next slide, you will see the action sheets. As you might have seen, there are quite a number of them, so you can access to them in terms of the different steps of the regulatory cycle, the different geographies, the different targets, so you can tag and filter and play in the website, and hopefully you will find what you are looking for. Next slide. Then once you get to action sheet, you will see what is the description, what is the estimated cost, frequency, target groups, and then where do we have examples from. Next slide. And also then it is upcoming that we will have a suite of specific examples for the rural context, and we have started doing this data information collection in Latin America and Caribbean, but this will soon be already as well in the website, as well as translated to English in this case. And in the future, we hope to be translating some of these materials to other languages as there is more demand for this. So just to say that in order to conclude with what we are launching at this stage, next slide, we are also have also developed an online course in collaboration with CapNet and with the support of Swedish SIDA for regulation in the water and sanitation sector based on this approach, where you would get all the information in detail on how to apply this, and all the access, of course, to examples and more materials in terms of regulation. So I hope you find this interesting, and please don't hesitate to write to us in case you have further examples, because we aim to expand the base of different examples and topics of focus for this approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I would like to pass the floor now to Ahmed Garbawi, who is a WASH specialist at UNICEF Iraq, who is presenting the practical implementation of this tool in Iraq on behalf of the government of that country. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge and Alejandro. So just giving a little bit of the Iraq experience regarding working with SIWI on the WASHREG. Giving some introduction about the context in Iraq. As we know, Iraq, since 1980, Iraq has been in a series of conflict and political instability, which made the system and regulation fragile. After 2003, we also had more fragility in terms of the system or regulations. There was a big need to invest more on enabling environment process and building system, in addition to the construction and rehabilitation that's been adopted after 2003. So that's why UNICEF and SIWI work together on establishing the WASHREG. And it actually started in two areas in the central government of Baghdad and also in the Kurdistan region. Next slide. So as the definition is just said by Alejandro, so I don't have to repeat it. There are 6 pillars we rely on: the tariff regulation, the service equality, competition regulation, consumer protection, and environmental regulation, and finally public health regulation. Next slide. So the steps, as said, UNICEF and SIWI discussed the need. We agreed that there is a need for applying the WASHREG in Iraq. Then UNICEF discussed that with the Ministry of Municipalities and General Water and Sanitation Directorate. We identified the pillars. Out of 6, we selected 4. And then we formed the core team, which consist of expert people from the Ministry of Municipalities and different departments, including water, sanitation, health, environment, and others. And the selection of pillars, and then the selecting of criteria. And then this all were taken to the workshop, which has been done in 2 areas in Kurdistan, Iraq, and also in Baghdad, with the participation of around more than 60 participants from different sectors, including water, health, environment, and even the monitoring entities and the decision makers. All together, they discussed the gaps, causes, solutions, and also proposing the action plan for the water and sanitation sector. Next slide. So the pillar selected was, in general, they were main focus on the service level and tariff setting, public health, and environment. And for example, for the last workshop, there was 20 activities followed by many sub-activities. Next slide. So major activities, as said, there was 20 major activities followed by around 50 sub-activities. So I'm just picking the most important maybe. Developing of benchmark studies to monitor the level of key performance indicators and improve their transparency and social monitoring. Perform a complete inventory of the network and the consumers. Accelerate the generalization of meter installations. There is no meter installation covered for the whole country. License private sewage operators and provide monitoring protocol because they are working, by themselves. There is no really monitoring for their work. Enhance access to information and compliant mechanism. It appears that there is no even a way of communication between the consumers and the entities and the operators. And also mitigate environmental and health risks associated due to the illegal connection to the drainage system. Next slide. Finally, the way forward is that as we have just finished the workshops, so we are working on validating the findings and activities and action plan by the Ministry of Municipalities. We want them to be the ownership of this change if they were able to make the change. We want them to adopt the activities and be the one responsible of implementation with assistance also of UNICEF. We will also discuss with them the most important activities and intervention we are looking for to implement. And then we are looking for seizing the progress of the system. And I think this is one of the most important things, that we're looking for the commitment of the government to take these actions because they are the one who are actually stating the laws and regulations in the country. So without their commitment, the process will be just hard to implement. So we are relying on them, and that's why we will have a session on Tuesday with the government representative who's going to go in details, showing the process and the activities that will be adopted by the Ministry of Municipalities. Thank you. Over to you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. So with this part of this block, finishing the launching of the WASHREG portal. The WASHREG tool was launched 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, here in Stockholm during the World Water Week. And today you can all have access to this portal through this washreg.org website. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Batsirai Majuru, who is a technical officer and focal point for drinking water regulation and testing at WHO. She's going to introduce you the RegNet, which is another initiative on regulation. WHO, in addition to being one of the partners in the development of the WASHREG tool, has this network of operators. So without further delay, I would like to pass the floor to Batsi, who will introduce you this initiative. Batsi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone who's joining us today. So as Jorge mentioned, WHO runs an international network of drinking water and sanitation regulators, or RegNet. And the goal behind this network is really to strengthen the capacity of these regulators, ultimately in order to strengthen service delivery, but particularly from WHO's side, in order to protect public health. So what we really want to see is that water and sanitation services are being delivered in a sustainable and professional manner, and that they're being able to protect the health of users. So RegNet really focuses on the regulator side of professional management of services. These are the people that we're talking to. These are the people that we are engaging with. And one of the reasons for this is, as you know, WHO publishes guidance or norms on water and sanitation, such as the guidelines for drinking water quality, or more recently, the guidelines on sanitation and health. And the primary audience for this guidance are these regulators. But one of the key questions that always comes up is, how do you practically unpack what is in those guidelines to make sure that it is being implemented in countries in order to have regulatory frameworks and services that are delivering services that they're supposed to, but are also protecting public health. So as Jorge mentioned, a few years ago, we started working on this WASHREG initiative with UNICEF and other partners, because one of the other concerns that we have is realizing that there are services that are kind of falling out of the radar when it comes to oversight. When we think about sanitation, for instance, there is a huge need to make sure that sanitation services are being regulated in an inclusive manner. And one of the key questions that regulators might face is, where do we start from? And so we really see WASHREG as this set of tools that really helps us to initiate that conversation around, how do we start if you don't have any regulation that is going on at all, but also realizing that in other parts of services, even for drinking water, there might be an improvement in how those regulations, in how those services are being regulated. And again, like Alejandro mentioned, WASHREG is not just a tool for when you're initiating regulation, but it's also a tool that can be used when you're reviewing those regulations and trying to figure out how to improve. And so this is where we really see the role of WASHREG being able to contribute to harmonization of the support that we're giving to these services. I'll be happy to share more on RegNet and some of the things that we're working on. I've listed the website there and also the email, but for now, I will stop here. Thank you.
Yes. So now we will pass the floor to the last speaker in today's session. So I'd like to invite Maria Eduarda Gobela Berto, who is the Water and Sanitation Senior Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. Again, another partner of the development of the WASHREG tool, but also supporting the Latin American region with the RegWAS LAC. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge. Good evening and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Today I'm presenting to you the program for improvement of public policies and the regulation of the water and sanitation services in Latin America, called REG-WAS-LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a collaborative approach initiative aimed at strengthening the framework and practice of public policy and regulation of drinking water and sanitation services in LAC. So we have the promoters are the IADB, Liz Water, and Aderasa, with the support of the government of Portugal. And we've been, since 2020, when it was launched, we kept close dialogues with UNICEF, the WHO, and SIWI in this matter. And this initiative brings together regulations, governments, international organizations, and also experts in the efforts of cooperation and joint action. Next slide, please. So until now, the main results are broad mobilization of regulators and continuous work dynamics, since we have in this program more than about 47 regulators and in 20 countries. We have promoted a global approach to regulation, a platform for evaluation, benchmarking, and regulatory improvement, regulatory training in this platform, institutional strengthening, diagnosis of regulation in the region, and benchmarking between regulators. Next slide, please. Also, we have developed in the last 2 years knowledge tools, action guide for decision makers, policy brief, technical guide with regulatory evaluation methodology, 6 brainstorming briefs based on institutional architecture of the sector, market structure for the provision of the service, regulation of public and private versus private providers, path to universal regulation, organization and management of the regulations, and independence and responsibility of the regulation. We've carried on online training course, 16 modules based on case studies, and an online discussion forum. And next slide, please. So with this, we have finished the first, which was the first phase of the program, and there are future activities such as support toolboxes. We're going to develop a platform with the evaluation, new benchmarking of the regulators, an observatory, which is another tool with a global view, more capacity building, and we're going to publish practical guides with best practices. Also, and action support the regulators, such as advisory, strategic advisory to the regulators, benchmarking, as we say, interchange experiences between the regulators, renew the capacity building, and last but not least, promote mobilization, awareness, and communication. That's it. Now I pass Jorge. Thank you very much. That was it for the REG-WAS-LAC.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are coming to an end of this session. I'm looking at the chat box. I think we only have one question. I presume is related to the WASHREG, which is how best can a country take on the initiative, but maybe also Batsy and Maria Eduarda, if you want to also comment on the other initiatives, I think that's perfectly fine. But I would suggest maybe Alejandro, if you want to reply to this question. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, well, most important, depending on which institution we are talking about, if it's one of the national institutions, it would be good to set up a conversation to as Ahmed mentioned, to understand the situation, what is the priorities, the demand, what is the current context, to understand to what extent the WASHREG approach, how to adapt the WASHREG approach to the context, and then take it from there in terms of the next steps, the stakeholders to be invited, etc. Right? So it's as we were mentioning, we explain it very quickly because of the time, but it's a process to be undertaken. And then, of course, in the website there is all the materials also to have a first view about how this works and what other examples. But I don't want to take too much time because I don't know if Batsy wants to say something. And Maria Eduarda about the other.
I also see that Mark in the chat box has a question maybe for Batsy. WHO has drinking water quality standards in place for many years, available for adoption by regulators. My understanding is that these quality standards are not adopted because they cannot be enforced. Has this changed? I think that's another question, but also connects with the first question.
Thank you for the question, Jorge, and thank you, Mark, for that question. So we have been doing some work to track implementation or uptake of the WHO guidelines. There's a document that is called Global Overview of National Regulations and Standards for Drinking Water, which really outlines how many countries have used the WHO guidelines as the basis for setting their own water standards. And so we know that as of now, there are about 120 countries, 118, 120, if I'm not mistaken, countries that have been using the WHO guidelines as the basis for setting their own drinking water regulations. But you highlight a very important point around enforcement. So the extent to which we see uptake of these guidelines and subsequent enforcement varies by countries. There's some countries where they will take a lot of it's initially just taking directly what is in the guidelines and applying them in their own national standards. That is not really what we encourage. If you look at the guidelines for drinking water quality, what we really encourage is customization. We really encourage that countries look at their own resources, prioritize public health parameters that they need to take into account based on the issues that they are facing, and then set national standards. And so in some countries, this is being done well. In other countries where we see there's a problem is where there's a direct copy and paste, if you like, from the WHO guidelines, and then they're limited resources for enforcing. So the real issue that needs to be addressed is a risk-based approach to the development of these national standards based from the WHO guidelines for drinking water quality. I would be happy to share the link to the document in the chat, maybe after the session, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Batsy. I think we only have time for one last question. I think this is for Eduarda. From Laura, what is the next step in implementation of the Red Watch initiative in Latin America?
Thanks for the question, Laura. Yes, the next steps are the implementation of this two boxes to support the two boxes platform WaterGov with the evaluation of the regulators benchmarking and another platform, worldwide platform called Observatorio, and more capacity building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid we are coming to an end to this just 30 minutes flash session on regulation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. And I look forward to seeing you later this week. Stay tuned. There are many events happening here in Stockholm. Most of them are available online. So for those who are connecting remotely, as you know, you can continue enjoying remotely many sessions. So thank you very much for choosing to be here today on a Sunday afternoon, early morning for somebody, very late in the evening for others. and for choosing this session among all the different sessions that are happening in parallel in this Stockholm World Water Week. Looking forward to seeing you in future sessions. Thank you very much.